I was reborn as a CEO's assistant, becoming a front-row spectator to all the drama. When the female lead accidentally spilled freshly brewed coffee on the CEO's $10,000 shirt, I outwardly scolded her in panic while internally marveling. Holy crap, boiling water on his chest. That's gonna leave some nasty burns. One on each side. Looks like the CEO will be wearing a bra to work tomorrow. The CEO's cold demeanor froze, and he turned back to look at me with an ominous expression. When that cup of freshly brewed coffee descended from above, my heart stopped for a moment as I finally remembered this plot point. The female lead, forced to work for the CEO to repay her debt for ruining his expensive shirt, would spark a romance with him, leading to a million-word love story. True to his male lead status, the CEO managed to step back quickly enough to avoid having the scalding coffee pour directly on his head. Still, it splashed across his chest, leaving everyone in stunned silence. The sound of the breaking cup snapped me back to reality. I quickly pulled out my handkerchief to help clean the CEO's shirt. Oh my god, Mr. Fu, are you all right? May, quick, get some cold water and bring the spare shirts from the car. What can I say? As his assistant, my job is to take care of his daily needs. Sure, the CEO's high maintenance, but the salary makes it worth it. Scolding the female lead is one thing, but losing my job would be worse. The coffee was scorching hot. I could feel the heat through the handkerchief and see wisps of steam rising. Must have been made with freshly boiled water. If I could feel the heat, imagine how it felt for the CEO who got it directly on his skin. His collar was turning red, looking almost cooked. I quickly took the cold water from the junior assistant and dabbed his chest with the cool cloth. Please bear with it, Mr. Fu. Once the clothes arrive, we can apply some medicine while you change. The CEO remained silent, coldly allowing me to clean his shirt. The firm muscles beneath my hands didn't stir any feelings in me. This idiot boss is always complaining about stomach aches and headaches, acting like a drama queen. He stands up business partners without warning, leaving me to clean up his mess, all while exploiting us workers. Karma. This is pure karma. Getting coffee spilled on him. All I can say is serves him right. Well done, female lead. Thinking this, I couldn't help but gloat internally. Boiling water on the chest. That's gonna leave some serious blisters. One on each side. CEO's gonna need a bra for work tomorrow. The body under my hands suddenly tensed and a cold gaze fell on my head. Confused, I looked up to meet the CEO's icy stare. His gaze carried an invisible killing intent that made me shiver. My mouth moved faster than my brain. Mr. Fu, don't be angry. I'll call a doctor right away. Damn, looks like the coffee really pissed him off. But why take it out on me? I wasn't the one who spilled it. You're the one who had to act all cool, walking so fast up front, charging around like a wild boar. Who can you blame but yourself? Was it my imagination, or did the CEO's face darken even more? A soft, delicate voice spoke up. The female lead stood there with reddened eyes, tears welling up as she gazed at the CEO, looking utterly pitiful. I'm so sorry, it was an accident. I'll definitely pay for the shirt. The CEO remained cold-faced and silent but shot me a meaningful glance. My worker instincts kicked and I knew some things were beneath a CEO's dignity to say, and that's where disposable side characters like me came in. The boss's instructions were clear. To avoid getting my pay docked, I immediately put on my most acerbic voice. How will you pay? Our CEO's clothes are all custom made. This shirt alone costs over $10,000. Pay? Can you even afford it? My acting was Oscar-worthy. Even street dogs would applaud. The female lead bit her lip, lifting her head defiantly to look at the CEO. I may not have money now, but I'll definitely pay you back. Please let me work here to repay the debt. Perhaps moved by her defiant spirit, the CEO glanced at her, thought for half a second, then turned to me. Assistant Lin, go arrange. I quickly responded, internally rolling my eyes. Oh my god, it's really turning into a romance novel plot. In real life, how could a CEO with your pig brain even run a company? Someone says they want to work here, and you just give them a position. Aren't you worried they might be corporate spies? Don't blame me when the money tree by the entrance gets killed with hot water. The CEO's words halted, his expression flickering, the rest of his sentence stuck in his throat. Though I already knew what he wanted to say, I maintained an attentive expression while my internal monologue continued. I'm not targeting her specifically, just criticizing your behavior. Don't you do background checks before hiring? What if she has a criminal record? You're treating running a company like a game. If I were going to scam you, I'd break your $1 million watch that would set me up for life. She's broke. Haven't heard of credit cards, payment plans, IOUs. There are so many people who can't find jobs, but she spills coffee on you and gets hired. When did you become such a pushover? Tomorrow I'll apply to have the giant Buddha moved so you can sit there instead. The CEO's lip twitched, his face turning ugly. His lips moved silently before he turned back to fix me with a dark stare. Me? What's his problem now? Why's he having another fit? What did I do? Meeting my confused look, the CEO took a deep breath and ground out, "Go arrange to get her contact information. I want to see the payment in 3 days." My hand paused mid-note and I looked up bewildered. Huh? Payment in 3 days? Then how would the female lead's plot work? This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. She's the female lead. I couldn't help but remind the CEO, "This young lady says she has no money. To help her pay back faster, perhaps we should arrange a POS. So what? How she pays is her problem. No credit cards, no payment plans. Is an IOU really that hard?" The CEO gave me a cold smile. "Assistant Lin, I never knew you were so kind-hearted. Why don't we move the giant Buddha and have you sit there instead? Damn, a man's heart is truly unfathomable." At that moment, the female lead turned pale. As she saw the CEO about to leave, she threw her head back and blocked his path. How can you be so cold-blooded and cruel? Listen to that. Such a desperate line straight out of the 90s. The CEO couldn't even be bothered to raise an eyebrow, just shot me another glance. Everything was understood without words. Receiving my boss's signal, I didn't have time to wonder why the plot had changed. This was directly linked to my precious salary. I put on my professional smile and stood between them. "I'm sorry, miss, but Mr. Fu is very busy. I'll handle the compensation details with you." Though I said this since she was the original female lead, I was still worried about unexpected developments. While the CEO hadn't completely left, I raised my voice, trying to dig up some special qualities that might make him change his mind. "Our company is a Global 500 enterprise. 50% of our employees have domestic master's degrees, 30% studied abroad, 20% have PhDs, and 10% have deep connections with the Fu family. Of course, I'm not saying education is everything. What I mean is, do you have any special qualities that could make up for these requirements and convince us to hire you?" My words were clear and concise. We had plenty of highly educated people here to get the CEO's attention. She needed something truly memorable. The female lead hesitated. Aye. The CEO had long legs by now. He was almost at the door. "Come on, female lead. This is a direct interview. Anyone who's job hunted knows what to say. Your strengths, your advantages, what you can bring to the company." The female lead had a flash of inspiration and, meeting my expectant gaze, confidently lifted her head. "I make really good soda crackers. ? She stared at the CEO's back with sparkling eyes, her voice loud and confident. "I guarantee, one bite and you'll never forget the taste." The CEO's steps faltered. I also froze. "What? Bro, seriously? Our company kitchen isn't short-staffed." But then I understood. In the original story, the CEO loved soda crackers, but couldn't eat many due to his terrible stomach condition. Only the female lead's crackers didn't aggravate his stomach pain, making him unable to leave her. Even dogs would laugh at this setup. Still, you can't apply normal logic to romance novels. The CEO was already starting to turn around, and a good assistant should prepare the way for their boss. So I quickly put on an interested expression. "Oh, seriously? For real? Such a stupid reason and she gets to stay. Are you a CEO who's never eaten anything good? You have Michelin star chefs at home but prefer food from strangers. Aren't you afraid of being poisoned? Did soda crackers save your life or something? Don't tell me you pick up stray crackers off the street just to try them." The CEO's turning motion froze midway. "Man, I can't even. Don't blame your stomach problems. You probably deserve stomach cancer. What kind of cheap boss is this? With his management style, will our company go bankrupt? Should I start looking for a new job before?" The CEO at the door suddenly let out a cold laugh, decisively strode forward and disappeared around the corner. Why did he leave again? Did I imagine it wasn't he about to come back? The female lead seemed confused too, but the CEO was long gone. I could only slowly turn back, maintaining my polite smile. "I'm sorry, miss, let's discuss the compensation details. Do you perhaps have any credit cards or payment plans available?" While the CEO was in his meeting, I still had to arrange his schedule. During this time, I quickly stuffed 2 bites of bread in my mouth to stave off hunger. Can't help it, this is a sweet romance novel, and as the head eunuch, I have to follow the CEO everywhere, sometimes playing multiple roles: villain, evil female rival, or the random person who says, "Young master hasn't smiled like this in so long." Before I could finish my bread, the CEO finished his meeting. I quickly stuffed the half-eaten melon bread into my pocket and hurried to follow his stride. That half-eaten melon bread was my breakfast, the remaining half would be lunch. Business hours flew by, and suddenly it was lunch break. Right at mealtime, my perfectionist boss wanted his private chef's lunchbox. The exquisite dishes filled the office with their aroma. I couldn't help but shed two bitter tears as I patted the melon bread in my pocket. Oh bread, it's not that Mama doesn't love you, it's just that the smell over there is too tempting. Don't be angry, Mama will eat you later. It's not that I can't afford better food, mainly it's because our stingy boss only gives 30 minutes for lunch break. It takes 20 minutes just to queue in the cafeteria, and with elevator wait times, it's just not worth it. Lunch break arrived, but just as I was about to put down my work, our industrious CEO thoughtlessly pointed at the documents on the table. Assistant Lin, categorize these files. I'll need them soon. I maintained my smile and pulled back my already extended leg, forced to sit back down beside him. Yes, Mr. Fu. The food aroma was stimulating my brain, my soul almost being drawn away, my heart full of resentment. Screaming. Vomiting. I fart in your direction. Eat, eat, eat. Hope you find a huge worm in your food. Look at the clock. It's noon. Am I made of iron? I need to eat. I need to eat my melon bread. Damn it, may cockroaches crawl in your bed. May you get a slip disc. May maggots grow on your butt. May you be sentenced to 180 years in prison. The CEO expressionlessly turned to look at me, and I immediately turned to look back at him, my smile proper and dignified. Yes, Mr. Fu. Do you have other instructions? Haha, this is how we workers are. Cursing inside, smiling outside. The CEO glanced at another food box the chef had brought, his voice ice cold. Work faster, that one's for you. Ha! I blinked, pointing at myself like a confused pufferfish. Me? The CEO ignored me. I looked at the food box in disbelief, then felt a small surge of excitement. The CEO's work meals are something money can't buy. The ingredients alone would cost my entire month's salary. Oh, my charming boss, seems you're not so bad after all. The CEO snorted coldly, seeming to curl his lips slightly. I didn't pay much attention after all. My boss's brain can't be understood by normal logic. He can mysteriously curl his lips 800 times a day, speak hoarsely 500 times, and frown 300 times. I contentedly patted my pocket. The remaining half of the melon bread would be for dinner. By the time I diligently finished processing the documents, the CEO had finished eating. He stood up coldly throughout 10 minutes and left the room. Well, considering this private chef's lunchbox, I'll grudgingly forgive him for cutting into my lunch break. Of course, I knew there was another reason. The CEO has two executive assistants who take turns managing his affairs. I handle work hours, while another male assistant handles his personal time, including my usual break time, which was covered by someone else. However, today that assistant called in sick, which meant I had to shadow Mr. Fu constantly without a moment to myself. He graciously allowed me 10 minutes for lunch, which was actually quite generous of him. My thoughts were quickly consumed by the exquisite dishes before me. I had to admit, the food prepared by the top-tier private chef was absolutely divine. Come to think of it, Mr. Fu seemed even more ridiculous for refusing proper meals and obsessing over Melody's homemade soda crackers instead. Just as I was wiping my mouth after enjoying the meal, Alexander's secretary called me in a panic. Sarah, have you seen Mr. Fu? I froze. Mr. Fu? He left his office just 10 minutes ago. No, he didn't. The secretary's voice was filled with anxiety. I haven't seen him anywhere, and the people from Xingye Pharmaceuticals are almost here. We can't find him anywhere. By this point, I was getting worried too. Though called a secretary, he was actually a personal aide specially assigned to Mr. Fu by the elder Mr. Fu, helping with work at a vice president level. He was usually extremely busy, which was why he typically asked me directly about things. But now, even I, the sole executive assistant, had no idea where Mr. Fu was. This was a major oversight. I immediately mobilized the entire company to search for him. However, after searching every floor of the building, I still couldn't find him. Kidnapping, revenge killing, or had he also transported to another world? As these wild theories swirled in my mind, a faint groan caught my attention. The cleaning lady was holding her waist, looking troubled. When she saw me, her eyes lit up and she hurried over. Oh, Assistant Lin. The cleaning lady approached and, without waiting for my response, started rambling. I feel quite embarrassed asking, but my back is killing me from all the heavy work these past few days. The elevator on the 75th floor is broken, and I need to climb 2 more floors. She pushed a roll of toilet paper into my hands. I remember your and Mr. Fu's office is up there, right? Could you help me put this paper in the bathroom when you go up? I frowned. Sorry, Mrs. Zhang, I'm busy right now. Wait. I stared at the toilet paper in my hands as a theory formed in my mind. No toilet paper, surely not. But what if? For the sake of my boss's dignity, I silently stuffed the toilet paper in my pocket and rushed back upstairs. Like a bolt from the blue, the truth dawned on me. The men's bathroom was eerily quiet, with only one stall door firmly shut. I finally understood everything. I stared at that door thinking, sorry, boss, I've never been responsible for your bathroom breaks before. I had no idea this could happen. So in the past, did the male assistant stand outside the door to hand him toilet paper? No. Mr. Fu's gritted voice suddenly rang out from behind the door, startling me. What was this man freaking out about now? The bathroom fell into an awkward silence. I knew the boss wouldn't call for help, his pride wouldn't allow it. He was probably hoping to sneak out and grab the paper after I left it, then sneak back in. After all, he was the CEO. But seriously, how was he planning to come out with his pants down? What if someone walked in and saw him half naked in the bathroom? He'd look like some perverted streaker. The sound of teeth grinding came from the stall. To preserve Mr. Fu's dignity, I let out a sigh and decided not to disturb his bathroom business. If I stayed quiet, he wouldn't know who I was, and I could pretend I didn't know who he was. Perfect, right? We both tacitly remained silent. I carefully approached the bathroom door and swiftly slid the toilet paper under the gap at the bottom, then turned and left, mission accomplished. Outside the bathroom, I quickly resumed my professional demeanor. Alexander's secretary came in anxiously. I patted his shoulder confidently and calmly said, "Don't worry, everything's been taken care of." The secretary looked confused. "You found Mr. Fu. Where is he?" "The Xingtian people are already in the reception room. Don't worry, he'll be there shortly," I said in a low voice. Some things are better left unquestioned, you know. The secretary didn't understand, but his professional instincts led him to trust me, so he obediently left the office. I shook my head, smiling as I returned to my work. Where else could you find such a thoughtful executive assistant who knew how to protect the boss's reputation? An hour later, the secretary called me again, his voice full of desperation. "Sarah, what exactly did you handle? Mr. Fu never showed up. The Xingye people are getting impatient and I can't hold them off anymore." I was stunned. This wasn't right. Was he having bloody stools? How could wiping take this long? Come on, after an hour, forget bleeding, he must have polished his bottom mirror smooth by now. I puzzled over this as I reached into my pocket and saw the white toilet paper. Suddenly, I froze. Where was my melon bun? The next day, a new rule appeared in the company: no melon buns allowed. I tearfully bit into a pineapple bun, starting my workday with a grudge. But the pineapple bun was too sweet, every bite made me want to throw up. Just as I finished another bite, Mr. Fu entered the office. I quickly hid the pineapple bun. The sickly sweet taste stuck in my throat, making me nauseous. Mr. Fu glanced at me without a word, but I knew he wanted me to report today's schedule. I stood up, understanding his silent command, and walked to his side. Just as I was about to speak, that sweet taste surged up my throat, causing me to dry heave right in Mr. Fu's face. Ignoring Mr. Fu's expression, I began reporting the day's work. But you know what? Mr. Fu didn't scold me or dock my pay, so I still loved working for him. Maybe it was my imagination, but my idiot boss's face seemed to turn a bit red. Why did it just turn dark again? It was nearly noon again, and my fellow assistant was still on leave, meaning another day of overtime. I had already accepted the reality of being overworked. My hand sneakily reached into my pocket, ready to sneak a bite of pineapple bun, when Mr. Fu suddenly stood up. I immediately stood up too. "Mr. Fu, do you have any instructions?" From this angle, I could only see Mr. Fu's perfect jawline. "Have lunch with me today," Mr. Fu said. This caught me off guard, since he hadn't mentioned it beforehand. It would be impossible to make restaurant reservations, now we'd have to try our luck finding an available spot. As if reading my thoughts, Mr. Fu said dismissively, "No need for 5-star restaurants. Choose wherever you like." "I like 5-star restaurants. But I couldn't say that out loud. I quickly opened my phone to make reservations for lunch. After all, this guy had a sensitive stomach. If he got sick, it would still come out of my paycheck. After searching for a while, I still couldn't find a restaurant that wouldn't risk upsetting Mr. Fu's stomach, so I asked the secretary for his opinion. The secretary thought for a moment and told me that we had booked an entire 5-star hotel for a business negotiation with a potential partner today. The hotel was expensive, but thinking we should get our money's worth, he suggested we eat there. After all, the company had been having cash flow problems recently, and the finance department was overwhelmed. In that case, why don't we move the meeting to lunchtime? After negotiations, it'll be afternoon, and we'll save on 12 hours of rental fees. The secretary had an epiphany, realizing I had a point. "All right, let's do that," he agreed. "Really? Won't they be angry if we change the time last minute? It's fine, we're the client. Okay, I'll notify our negotiation team now. Good, lunch problem solved. While I was talking, Mr. Fu went to the bathroom again. Remembering the last embarrassing incident, I decided to wait before telling him about the change of plans. Besides, the secretary usually handled most business matters, so he would probably inform Mr. Fu. I didn't need to worry too much. Everything was set. I left the office to find Mr. Fu standing impressively in the hallway. When he saw me, his eyes inadvertently fell on my pocket. I coughed, guiltily touching my pocket, only to remember I had changed into formal slacks for the business meeting and had taken out the pineapple bun earlier. Mr. Fu seemed very satisfied, walking proudly ahead, seemingly deliberately slowing his pace to wait for me. I quickly caught up. It's just a simple lunch, Mr. Fu said, his voice containing barely noticeable pleasure. No need to dress up specially. Simple lunch. As expected of a CEO, making business negotiations sound so casual. But how could I not change clothes? It was an important occasion after all. I adjusted my collar. We can't lose face. Do I look proper now? After a long moment, I finally heard Mr. Fu's awkward and somewhat shy voice. Not bad. Hearing this, I finally felt relieved. 10 minutes later, I led Mr. Fu to the hotel and opened the private room door to find the entire partnership team gathered around the round table, their eyes fixed intently on us. Among them, the partner's representative was panting and sweating profusely, clearly having rushed over. Mr. Fu stood silently at the door, turning back to stare at me. Lunch? Yes, lunch plus our partners. I stood tall with a professional smile. Don't worry, our team is very strong, and our new legal advisor is excellent. We won't get taken advantage of again. Mr. Fu was silently seated by me, but before he could warm his seat, a server suddenly knocked and entered with a bouquet of roses. Hello, your ordered roses. The server's words cut off abruptly as they stared blankly at our roomful of people, confused by the "For You Alone" card on the roses. Is this for me? The partner's representative exclaimed delightedly, stepping forward to accept the roses with a touched expression. Oh my goodness, I never expected you to prepare something like this. I am so moved. Mr. Fu crushed a glass in his hand. That afternoon, we successfully secured the project for 80 million. Both parties moved to tears as we drank and celebrated. Mr. Fu silently ate his boiled cabbage. Since the amount was much lower than expected, the secretary and I got a bit too excited. He trembled as he grasped my hand. This is wonderful, Assistant Lin. This deal's success is inseparable from your hard work and dedication. I firmly grasped his hand back. No. Secretary He, we wouldn't be here today without your efforts either. Assistant Lin. Secretary He. You too, Mr. Fu coldly interrupted, separating me and the secretary as we attempted to hug, having fun. The secretary and I fell silent, looking at each other in confusion. Me, huh? What does he mean? Secretary He, don't know, didn't you tell the CEO about lunch with the partners? I expressed my shock through my eyes. Bro, I'm just an assistant, shouldn't you be the one to notify him about such important matters? Secretary He's horror matched mine. You're the executive assistant. Don't you handle meeting arrangements? Secretary He. Me? Mr. Fu hadn't spoken to me for 3 days. He's been cold towards me these 3 days too, Secretary He said. We sat in the coffee shop downstairs whispering to each other, finally both sighing and lowering our heads. I'm worried, Secretary He said. I'm worried too, I said. Mainly worried about Mr. Fu firing me. Life is short. I know a good place to relax, Secretary He gave me an ambiguous smile. I took a bite of my pineapple bun dry and cloying. I really couldn't get used to this overly sweet taste. I'd better not, I replied, I have work this afternoon. Secretary He sighed disappointedly and let me return to my post. However, the moment I pushed open Mr. Fu's office door, I saw a familiar face. It was Melody. She had always been beautiful, but in this short time, she had become an incredibly gentle and refined woman. Assistant Lin. Melody flashed me a flawless smile the moment she saw me. At least, compared to my smile, hers was more proper and elegant. Seemingly sensing my confusion, she answered my question before I could ask. I'm Mr. Fu's new assistant. You can call me Melody. And so, our two-person office became a world of three, but my workload decreased dramatically. This morning, I only handled one document, then had nothing to do. Shocking. I couldn't help but turn to look at Melody working diligently beside me. Gentle, perceptive, and incredibly capable. Most importantly, she could make different delicious cookies for me every day. Is this the female lead's natural talent? I'm in love. Not just me, Mr. Fu was in love too. I could feel Mr. Fu and Melody's interactions increasing, while he barely spared me a glance anymore. His desk began piling up with various homemade snacks, and I felt like a third wheel. Then, I received a temporary reassignment notice. I examined the notice carefully. Supervisory department. Since when did our company have this department? Did Mr. Fu create it just for me? I'm sorry, Assistant Lin, this was Mr. Fu's decision. Melody looked at me regretfully. He thinks you need some rest. I stared at Melody's gentle face. Ah, so that's how it is. This isn't right, you're clearly being demoted. Secretary, he looked at me incredulously. And don't you think that woman is suspicious? Really? I stared at the bartender's beautiful face. But she's so damn gentle. The bartender winked at me. Well, actually, I knew. After all, I had been having some issues lately, finding it increasingly difficult to keep up with work. Being forced to step back from some high-intensity work was unavoidable. Are you sure it's not because Mr. Fu is angry about our oversight last time? I think that probably had something to do with it. Someone in his position couldn't afford too many mistakes around him. Like handing him half a melon bun while he was in the bathroom. I regretfully raised my glass, but before the alcohol touched my lips, Secretary, he snatched it away. Stop drinking, he said. I haven't had a single sip. Doesn't matter. Secretary, he helped me stand up. You're drunk, let's go. Seriously, I haven't had a single drop since we came in. Secretary, he led me towards the door. You're not thinking straight, come on. I literally haven't had a single drink. Secretary, his unusual behavior made me suspicious. I slapped his hand away and walked back, sure enough, seeing a familiar figure. Mr. Fu. And Melody. I just didn't want you to be too heartbroken. Secretary, he patted my shoulder and sighed. I hid in the corner, silently watching as Melody handed Mr. Fu a bag of golden brown soda crackers. Really? Still hung up on those soda crackers? I watched as Mr. Fu gently tore open the package and lifted a cracker to his lips. Look, brother, did soda crackers save your life or something? Eating your mistress's homemade soda crackers in a nightclub's dance floor, don't you think this combination is ridiculous? And if you two are meeting secretly, why not get a private room, or a love hotel, or have a romantic dinner to pour out your hearts? Why must it be on the dance floor of a club? At least get a VIP booth. Wait, could it be you couldn't get a reservation? After all, I used to book all the trendy spots for you. Damn, you're so tacky, I'm embarrassed to say I work for you. Mr. Fu froze mid-bite with his soda cracker, his expression suddenly turning dark. He crushed a cracker in his hand. No. Soda crack airs. The crackers couldn't hear my anguish, but Melody did. Her eyes inadvertently glanced my way. When she saw me, she startled, her usually gentle face immediately showing traces of panic, as she softly leaned against Mr. Fu's shoulder. Mr. Fu followed her gaze toward me, his expression cold as ice. I stood up. Let's go. Secretary, he looked terrified. Where? Home, of course. I stared back at him in horror. When you catch your boss with his mistress, you leave immediately. What, did you want to join them? Secretary, he fell silent and followed me out of the bar. Mr. Fu and Melody didn't come out. From that day forward, I was officially transferred out of Mr. Fu's office. I got a sinecure position, spending my days wandering aimlessly around the company. That's what happened, but I wasn't happy about it, which I'm sure everyone can understand. If I couldn't be happy, no one else should be either. One day I'd run to the finance department to nitpick, the next day I'd harass the sales department, and the day after that I'd reject the product department's new inventions. I even managed to get several excellent employees fired for various reasons. Naturally, I was summoned to Mr. Fu's office. Sarah, explain your recent behavior. Mr. Fu stared at me coldly. Supervision, I stared back at Mr. Fu righteously. Isn't that the new job you assigned me? Mr. Fu laughed coldly and threw a termination letter on the desk. You don't need to come anymore. He took a deep breath. I picked up the termination letter and smiled coldly. Don't forget the severance pay. Outside the door, Secretary, he had apparently been eavesdropping for who knows how long, looking at me worriedly. Sarah, don't say it, I cut him off. I do bear some responsibility for this, but I don't think the main fault lies with me. After all, Mr. Fu and I were a couple that was the company's unspoken secret. I was Alexander Fu's fiancé, handpicked by Mrs. Fu herself as her daughter-in-law. Working at the company was just to help Alexander manage it. I took off my engagement ring and held my empty hand in front of Secretary He. It's over, I said. Secretary He seemed about to say something when the office door was suddenly thrown open. Mr. Fu stood there with a dark expression, glaring viciously at my empty hand. Why are you still blocking the doorway? He gave me an unfriendly smile. Miss Lin, this is no longer a place you should come to. I smiled. Yes, after all, I was just a family-arranged fiancé, parachuted into his company to look after him. I was just the evil female supporting character in a romance novel, destined to be the stumbling block in the protagonist's love story. No sweet white lotus who could make soda crackers, no green tea girl who could make soda crackers, no ice queen who could make soda crackers, no pure high school girl who could make soda crackers. Of course I didn't have any real feelings for Alexander, well, maybe a little, but it was more because our marriage alliance had tied our businesses together. If either party withdrew carelessly, both sides would suffer major impacts. That was my money. I had to protect it. I'm leaving. Thank you for tolerating me for so long, I bowed to Mr. Fu. Let me give you one last blessing. May you get diabetes from eating all those soda crackers. After leaving the company, my phone buzzed with a message from Secretary He. Drinks tonight? Without thinking, I replied, sure. You can always find another job, you can always find another man, but missing out on a drink is missing out on one of life's great pleasures. That night, I put on my most stunning dress, planning to start a new hunting season. However, halfway there, someone suddenly covered my mouth and nose. Everything went black as I passed out. When I came to, I was in a completely unfamiliar environment. And two familiar faces were in front of me, Melody and Secretary He. I suppressed my emotions and looked at Secretary He. Was Melody your plant in the company? Secretary He didn't answer my question, but his affirmative response was implicit. Gone was his usual friendly expression, replaced by cold malice. That bastard Alexander protected you too well. It wasn't easy catching you alone. The next moment, a gun was pressed against my forehead. A gun? Are these things still allowed to appear in novels these days? I looked up in surprise, but Secretary He's expression wasn't fake. Why? I heard my own confusion. Secretary He's expression showed more surprise than mine. Why? A hint of mockery flashed across his face. Don't joke around, have you forgotten? Of course I knew why. As a reader, I knew all the plot points in the novel. Secretary He was the company's executive assistant and Mr. Fu's brother, the Fu family's illegitimate son. Because of the Fu and Lin family's marriage alliance, he was seen as a stain on the Fu family and thrown out. He was seeking revenge. It's not worth it, I said calmly. You're already at a vice president level. If you just work hard for 2 more years, you could start your own business. You could have your own life. Bullshit, I heard Secretary He's voice trembling. What do I need all this money for? How can it make up for my past suffering? Melody slowly stepped forward, gently leaning on Secretary He's shoulder. Let me do it. Her eyes were colder than I'd ever seen them. You promised me. Secretary He hesitated, then refused. Not this time, Secretary He said. Alexander is cautious, but as long as she's here, he'll come. This isn't what we agreed on. Melody's voice rose. You said after it was done, you'd let me handle my sister. No. Secretary He's face turned completely cold. I told you, she's still useful. Melody fell silent, staring at him for a while before suddenly laughing. Oh, you can't bear to do it? Her tone was dripping with sarcasm. Don't tell me you actually consider her a friend. Secretary He didn't speak, but his gaze shifted slightly away from Melody's. Melody laughed coldly. I get it. In that case, our cooperation ends here. She turned to leave. Transfer the money to my account and we're done. Seeing Melody give up, Secretary He seemed to relax, arrogantly walking behind me. It wasn't convenient to make a move at the company, but here, who knows? He leaned close to my ear. What do you think, would Alexander accept trading his suicide for your life? Before I could answer, I felt a sudden cool breeze. Then came a huge crash. Melody had taken advantage of Secretary He's distraction to rush over and knock him aside. And she'd grabbed his gun. Melody pressed the gun against me. Wait. Secretary He stumbled toward Melody. You can't. Goodbye. Melody smiled at me so sweetly, yet like a venomous snake flicking its tongue. Goodbye, sister. I gazed into her pitch-black eyes, which held none of the innocence and kindness from when I first met her. I slowly closed my eyes. I had read the entire novel and knew all the plot points. It was a bittersweet story about reconciliation after heartbreak. The female lead, Melody Chen, was the Lin family's illegitimate daughter, thrown out as a stain on the family when her sister got engaged in the marriage alliance. This was a marriage alliance between two business giants. No extra variables could be allowed to exist. Neither from the Fu family nor the Lin family. After being thrown out, the helpless Melody met Secretary He. Their identical fates bound them together. He reached out to help her, and she became his pawn for revenge. Under Secretary He's guidance, she seduced Alexander, stole company secrets, then had an awakening when the Fu family faced bankruptcy. The two of them were caught in an endless cycle of love and hate. The sound of the trigger being pulled was so clear. Under Melody's determined gaze, I suddenly opened my eyes and lunged at the gun. Sarah. The moment the muzzle flashed, I saw Alexander burst through the door and Secretary He's face filled with disbelief. As someone who had crossed over, of course, I knew how to avoid plot-mandated death. Although I had arrived too late to help Secretary He, too late after he and Melody had already met. But that didn't stop me from saving Melody, giving her a place where she could belong. I could naturally tell her she could pursue the life she wanted, that she didn't need to deliberately head toward the abyss. If she wanted to return to the Lin family to fight for her inheritance, I wouldn't mind either, as long as she had the qualifications. Of course, the compensation I offered her was very substantial. Though it wasn't my doing, the Lin family had indeed harmed her, and seeking forgiveness requires the right attitude. A future where she could live proudly, or a thorny path with no clear way forward. Who would choose to give up the path where they could hold their head high, if they weren't completely out of options? After much thought, Melody asked me for the family's traditional soda cracker recipe. She said she actually wanted to open a dessert shop, and that I'd given her too much. Really too much. Even so, she was still worried about Secretary He. He's left with nothing but his obsession, Melody told me. As she said, without her, there would be other girls Zhang Mengmeng, Huang Mengmeng, Sun Mengmeng. Secretary He wouldn't give up. Secretary He was my good friend, and I didn't want to watch him sink into the mire either. In that case, why not keep him right under our noses? Melody and I made a deal she would help me act while monitoring Secretary He, and I would try to save him. Of course, dear Mr. Fu helped out a bit too. Actually, I was quite nervous about telling him about this, since I hadn't grown up here, and didn't have the iron-fisted methods to keep others in line. No overwhelming power from being in a wish fulfillment novel, no strong female lead's confidence, no air of being a master strategist. I was just an ordinary person with a decent work ethic. Acting. That day, Mr. Fu's gaze remained cold, but what came out of his mouth was, "Fine. Whatever makes you happy." He tossed me a list. However, some business spies with unclear backgrounds have recently infiltrated the company. Many are working for Fu family uncles. It's awkward for me to handle directly, find a way to deal with them. Mr. Fu leaned back in his chair. "Consider it payment." I said no problem, as long as he gave me a new identity. The highest authority in the inspection department. We don't have such a department. Then create one. How can I find ways to cause trouble and fire people without any authority? And so came the scene of my reassignment. Now in the dim room, there was me all tied up, Mr. Fu who had burst in looking calm, Secretary He with his hands up in surprise, and Melody playing with a gun-shaped lighter. Nice lighter, isn't it? Melody looked amusedly at the flame coming from the muzzle. I sold it to Secretary He myself. Ah, release my treasure, don't you dare hurt her. Mr. Fu robotically delivered the lines I had prepared, his ears turning red. Just asking, but have you been wanting to say that for a while? Shut up. I slowly turned my gaze to Secretary He. You used a lighter for kidnapping. Playing house. Secretary He's face turned as red as a tomato. Damn it, what if there had been an accident, he said through gritted teeth. Melody whispered in my ear, "Oh, you're giving him too much credit. Since this is China, he couldn't get the real thing." I didn't want Melody to head toward destruction, nor did I want to see Secretary He go to extremes. Melody was willing to forgive the Lin family's actions and wanted to stop Secretary He's fall. Secretary He didn't really want to harm me, and clearly hadn't planned to actually hurt Alexander, or he wouldn't have brought just a lighter to a kidnapping. As for Mr. Fu, he had never been wary of Secretary He and even made him his vice president. Are there really so many bad people in the world? It was just the unreasonableness of romance novels. Or maybe the compensation wasn't enough. I don't know what happened to me. Secretary He's eyes showed a hint of confusion. At first I really wanted revenge, but as I gradually rose to the vice president position, I couldn't believe Alexander didn't know everything. Yet he still trusted me. My desire for revenge seemed to hit cotton. He now had his own career, with no one monitoring his life, no particularly deep blood feud. Why would he throw away the rest of his life doing evil things? Was his brain filled with shit? Maybe it was just to follow the plot. I laughed it off. Old romance novels often don't make sense. I took a bite of my pineapple bun and quickly hid it when Mr. Fu walked into the office. The incident ended perfectly. We were like kids who had played an enjoyable game of house, and everything returned to how it should be. I didn't have to play dumb and make work mistakes. Melody was freed from her miserable assistant job, and Secretary He no longer had to think about childish revenge every day. Mr. Fu, I'll report today's schedule to you. I stood beside Mr. Fu with my files, suddenly feeling something sickly sweet in my throat. I blew. I couldn't help but dry heave in Mr. Fu's face. Question mark. Mr. Fu coldly took out a pre-prepared homemade lunchbox from his drawer and threw it to me. Eat this in the mornings from now on, stop eating those damn pineapple buns. The male assistant who had finally come to work pointed at himself. Mr. Fu, where's mine? None for you, go eat pineapple buns. ? I couldn't help but laugh. Is the story's ending perfect? Looking at it roughly, it's not really perfect, there are even quite a few plot holes. But so what? I like happy endings, whether they're rough or refined. But does the story end here? Not necessarily. You can let your mind wander and fill in the future, or the gaps, or other people's stories, or your own. But I hope that whether it's regretful or satisfying, this is the ending you like. And my part that you can't see still has a very long way to go. As you might guess, this is a novel you shouldn't think too hard about, it's just meant to bring you a moment of joy. Even if it's just for an instant, isn't that worthwhile? Maybe this instant of happiness will help you forget about being overwhelmed by your boss's crazy demands today. Sarah, what are you dawdling for? Mr. Fu turned around. You're having lunch with me today. He paused before adding, just you and me. Got it. I sped up to finish my last bit of work and closed the file. Mr. Fu glanced at me, a hint of a smile seeming to play at his lips. And on my finger, Mr. Fu had replaced the old ring with a new one. Oh, this gorgeous rock is so amazing, I really don't want to take it off. Do you think he'd notice if I secretly sold it and replaced it with a $2 plastic ring from a street vendor? Sarah,